right, so welcome everyone. My name is Juliana Medeiros. I'm a scientist here at Holden Arboretum, and I'm going to be one of your co-hosts, along with Miss Maya Allen. You already met Miss Allen. She gave you that great introduction to the Black Botanist Week infographic. I'm going to give you a couple of technical notes before we introduce tonight's speaker. First of all, just so that you're aware, we're recording the Zoom meeting, and the meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, where it's going to be permanently archived for public viewing. The audience microphones are going to be muted for the entire talk, and we also recommend that audience members turn off their camera during the talk. We do encourage you to ask questions, and for that, we'll be using the chat feature. Ms. Allen will serve as the moderator tonight, and she'll be monitoring the chat window for your questions. You can submit your questions in chat at any time during the talk, and then at the end of the talk, Ms. Allen will choose questions from the chat window to ask the speaker. So our mission here at Holden Forests and Gardens is to connect people with the wonder, beauty, and value of trees and plants to inspire action for healthy communities. And we are super proud to be partnering with the Black Botanist Week to bring you what is actually the final installment of what has been a very exciting year-long series. This 11-part series has covered a broad range of botanical disciplines and delved into the historical legacy of formally trained and self-taught Black botanists. Through this series, we seek to shine a light on the Black roots within botany, to foster a community of Black botanists, to demonstrate the diversity within this community, and to inspire others who have not considered botany as a career choice. We want to give a huge thank you to the Cleveland Foundation for sponsoring this lecture series. The Cleveland Foundation works to enhance the lives of all residents of Greater Cleveland now and for generations to come, by working together with donors to build community endowment, address needs through grant making, and provide leadership on key community issues. You can learn more at clevelandfoundation.org. Now, I am going to introduce my co-host, Ms. Maya Allen. Ms. Allen is one of the founding members of Black Botanist Week and also a graduate student at the University of New Mexico, where she is studying the ecology and evolutionary biology of the role of phenotypic plasticity in colonization success. Ms. Allen is going to tell you a little bit more about Black Botanist Week, although maybe not, because we just had that tutorial with our power foibles, and she will also introduce tonight's speaker. So take it away, Ms. Allen.
Thank you, Dr. Medeiros, for that introduction. Yes, so you all are very well acquainted with Black Botanist Week now. And one of our fellow committee organizers is our speaker tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Natasza Fontaine. Currently a biology graduate student at Florida State University, Ms. Fontaine's research is focused on elucidating the symbiotic relationships between plants and birds, and understanding how patterns of plant diversity across the landscape, combined with bioacoustics monitoring, can inform the conservation and management of bird diversity. Her experience working at the New York Botanical Garden and the Florida State University Herbarium has ignited her passion for collections. In addition, she holds a visual arts degree from Norfolk State University, Bachelor's of Arts, and a communication degree in television production from the New York Institute of Technology, Master's of Arts. She also combines her skills in science and visual art and communication as a cultivo field artist in residency for the Art and Bio Collaborative in 2019, as a shorebird steward for the Florida Audubon, and as a board member of the Appalachia Audubon chapter. Welcome, Ms. Fontaine.
Thank you so much, Maya, and thank you everyone for being patient during the technical difficulty I was having. So we have a lot to cover, so I am going to just jump right into it. So common, but not ordinary, avian diversity in Florida's Mesig Flatwoods. So as a talk outline, there are a few key elements that I'll go over prior to my research. I'm going to go over the decline in common North American birds, avian migration in North America, avian habitat associations. Then I will discuss my research goals, study system, and my preliminary results. And if there's time, I have a bonus, a sneak peek of some of North Florida's natural communities. So since 1970, common birds found in North America have been in steep decline. Although there are many contributing factors to these declines, habitat degradation accounts for almost 50%, with exploitation and climate change following directly. Speaking of our changing climate, induced phenological mismatches among plants, insects, and birds have occurred. Let's take a look at the image on the left. Whoops, I'm having a little trouble here. Okay. In the 1850s, birds were found to arrive in the north around May 6, with plants leafing out soon after. But if you take a look at 2010, leaf out is occurring much earlier in April, and birds are arriving much later than leaf out in May. This mismatch disrupts food availability. 90% of common birds in decline come from migratory bird families such as blackbirds, thrushes, sparrows, and wood warblers. Birds are indicators of the state of our environment, and with this decline, we are losing valuable ecosystem services that migratory birds provide, such as pest control and seed dispersal on farms, as pollinators, and stimulation of the economy through ecotourism, as well as sparking an interest in conservation at a community level. So now let's take a look at migration, birds on the move. According to the US Fish and Wildlife, there are 716 bird species that breed in North America. And out of that, 54% are considered Nearctic neotropical migrants. This means that about 54% of birds found in North America spend only a quarter, just a few months of their annual life cycle on the breeding grounds, and the rest of the 3/4 of the annual cycle is spent migrating and overwintering and migrating again. And when they're doing this 3/4, they're in various and different habitats. Avian migration is one of Earth's largest migratory movements and one of the most energy expensive times during a bird's annual cycle. Billions of birds migrate each year from South America and the Caribbean, crossing the Gulf of Mexico and into North America and then back. Worldwide, there are 8 migratory flyways, with 4 of them in North America. Florida is an important part of the Atlantic flyway used by Nearctic and neotropical migratory birds. More specifically, the Florida Panhandle, which is right in here, is at the intersection of 2 important flyways, the Atlantic Flyway and the Mississippi Flyway. To complete this annual journey, birds need stopover sites. Okay, well, what exactly is a stopover site? So a stopover site are important locations where birds rest and refuel while en route during their migratory journey. This is a stop where they can obtain adequate water, food, and shelter. So focusing on North Florida and the Panhandle, North Florida is here, and a Panhandle. For some birds, North Florida is the last stop before crossing over the Gulf of Mexico to their wintering grounds. And for others, North Florida is the first stop after crossing the Gulf of Mexico in spring migration to their breeding grounds. Additionally, some birds are circumcoastal migrants, which migrate back and forth along the coastline, including the Florida Panhandle, up in here. So to reiterate, 3/4 of the avian life cycle is spent away from the breeding grounds, which is why it is imperative to understand avian habitat relationships. So next, we'll go over some habitat associations that have been found between plants and birds. Understanding why these relationships exist are significant to conserving both plants and birds. By understanding the relationship between bird assemblages and habitat, we can gain a better understanding of how avian communities are likely to change if plant species distributions are altered as a result of abiotic factors. So let's take a look at this black-throated gray warbler. Here on the x-axis represents the months of the year, and on the y-axis represents association, habitat association. So below the 0 represents a negative association, and above 0 represents a positive association. So during the week of May 24th, which is during migration, this bird, the black-throated gray, was positively associated with evergreen needle-leaf forest, and it avoids dense herbaceous habitat. As another example, during the week of May 10th, also migration, the wood thrush is positively associated with deciduous broadleaf forest and avoids greenleaf needle forest, herbaceous wetlands, and sparse forests. So both examples gives us an idea of which habitat these two bird species prefer. Historically, understanding habitat associations between plants and birds have emphasized that vegetation structure was the best predictor of bird communities. However, it is now known that this prediction is complex, and both vegetation structure and plant species composition play an important role in avian assemblages. But before we move on, what exactly is vegetation structure? So when I mention vegetation structure, I'm referring to the architecture of the landscape. The structure of the habitat, which is the distribution of plant communities, referring specifically to the diversity of plant species within a community that influence the structure of the habitat. It's kind of like a cityscape where you have, mid-story buildings, shorter buildings, taller buildings, and you can kind of use this as a comparison to how a forest landscape is also shows different architecture. Okay, so let's take a look at the study that examines how vegetation structure and plant species composition influence bird communities. In 2011, Houston et al. Conducted a large-scale study of species-specific habitat associations across Great Britain. A total of 825 woodland sites were surveyed. Out of the many species included in this study, I selected this cute little goldcrest and the redstart as the best representations of species response to vegetation structure. So looking at the figures in both of them, the x-axis is representing understory structure, and the y-axis on both of them is representing the probability of occurrence. So the goldcrest in figure A showed a preference to mixed vegetation structure and shrubs, whereas in figure B, the redstart preferred low and no understory and did not prefer mixed and shrubs. So in conclusion, both figures illustrate species-specific responses to vegetation structure, supporting the longstanding hypothesis that vegetation structure plays a role in avian habitat association. So now let's take a closer look at species-specific, plant-specific associations. From the same study, Houston et al. Examined the species-specific relationship to trees. In both figures, the x-axis represents tree species, and the y-axis, once again, represents the probability of occurrence. So in figure A, the goldcrest preferred coniferous stands, as you see here, these two. That was the preference of the goldcrest. And the Eurasian nuthatch exhibited a preference to broadleaf trees that produce large seeds, such as the oak and chestnut. So in conclusion, the diverse patterns of species occurrence were evident in relation to understory structure and tree species, suggesting species-specific habitat associations are significant. So let's talk about another driver in species-specific plant associations: food resources and seasons. So bringing the focus to North Florida, let's take a look at the seasonal interactions between birds and fruiting plant species. In all figures, the x-axis represents the years and the months between 1982 and 1984. And the y-axis in figure A represents the number of bird species, and figure B, the number of birds. In both figures, frugivore species diversity and abundance were highest during the fall and winter, and were lowest during spring and summer. So let's compare that to figure C. where the y-axis is representing the number of species, plant species in fruit. During fall and winter, there is an increase in fruiting pattern seen here. This pattern was consistent with the increase in bird diversity and abundance found during fall and winter. So I would like to highlight in this study, the increase in bird abundance and diversity was attributed to the presence of migrant birds and overwintering frugivores. Okay, so in summary, there are significant factors that contribute to habitat association between birds and plants: vegetation structure, plant species composition, resources, and seasonality, including migratory movement. So keeping that overview in mind, let's take a look at my research, which is based in the Apalachicola National Forest. The Apalachicola National Forest is the largest US national forest in the state of Florida, and is the only national forest located in the Florida Panhandle. Zooming in, the Apalachicola National Forest is located within the Florida Panhandle and has been recognized as a high stopover density area. Studies have shown that stopover habitat within 100 kilometers from the coastline, so here's the coastline here, and going in 100 kilometers, play a significant role during migration. The image on the right highlights the density of birds utilizing the Panhandle as a stopover site during fall and spring migration. It's higher in the fall. Knowing that the habitats found in the Panhandle are being used to rest and refuel during migration emphasizes the importance of understanding habitat associations and resource availability in these high traffic areas. So many habitat association studies in North and Central Florida have primarily focused on habitat specialists, such as the brown-headed nuthatch, red-cockaded woodpecker, and Bachman sparrows. Furthermore, numerous studies have focused on breeding bird responses to disturbance such as fire and hardwood reduction, but very few have focused on the relationship between habitat use during non-breeding seasons in the Apalachicola National Forest. With that being said, my research question: how does avian diversity vary between edges and interiors of mesic flatwoods during fall, winter, and spring? Aims to investigate how the diversity in vegetation structure created by plant species such as shiny blueberry, gallberry, and dwarf dangleberry relate to migratory birds such as the northern parula, winter residents such as palm warblers, and year-round residents such as eastern towhees. So let's take a look at the habitat my research is conducted in, which is mesic flatwoods. So there are over 81 natural community types throughout the state of Florida, and mesic flatwoods comprise over 1 million acres. Mesic flatwoods are characterized by a low, dense understory of shrubs and grasses and a canopy of tall pine. Mesic flatwoods are fire-dependent plant communities requiring fire intervals between 2 and 4 years to stimulate flowering and growth. Longleaf pine is a principal canopy tree in northern Florida and central Florida, whereas in South Florida, slash pine dominates the canopy. In North Florida, mesic flatwoods are separated by a unique system of natural edges that create a mosaic landscape. So if you look at this aerial image here, I circled what is considered the edge right here, and in between them are the flatwoods. So these edges are created by slow-moving waterways, which is here in this image, that vary in size and shape. And these edges serve as transition zones between mesic flatwood habitats. And just to reiterate, vegetation structure is the architecture, the physical feature created by the plant community. So when I mention edge habitat from this point on, I'm referring to the vegetation structure seen on the left here. Taking a closer look, the edge that I just described form a physical feature that can be greater than 6 feet in height. And some of the dominant plants found along these edges are gallberry, saw palmetto, featherbush, and tie-tie. So these plants here would be found if you were walking a transect right along this edge here. So not necessarily inside. Some of the most common birds found along the edges are gray catbirds, downy woodpeckers, and when yellow-rumped warblers start to show up, it's a sign that winter migrants are settling in. So now shifting to the interior forest, there is a striking difference in the structure found in mesic flatwoods. This is primarily because this habitat, as mentioned earlier, is maintained by prescribed fire. In environments where fire is suppressed, you typically would find mid-story vegetation structure, but here you can see it's a wide open. And so the image on the left illustrates this open understory with most plants reaching no more than 4 feet in height. And there are some understory plants that only reach about 2 to 2.5 feet in height. And some of these plants found there were shiny blueberry, dwarf live oak, dwarf dangleberry, and running oak. And here are a few birds observed in the interior forest. So pine warblers typically hang out in a canopy, but occasionally come down to ground level to feed. Yellow-bellied sapsuckers are one of my favorites. They're really quiet, they're loners. What I found is interesting about them is that when they forage alone most of the time, but if they are associating with a mixed flock, they pretty much keep a distance from it, which I thought was an interesting behavior. And lastly, chipping sparrows, they are pretty active winter residents, and I'm really glad that they are not as secretive as typical sparrows in this area. So now that you know a little more about my study site, let's take a look at data collection and analysis. So I selected 28 mesic flatwood pine stands as my survey sites in the Apalachicola National Forest. The stands I selected satisfied the habitat criteria of being mature pine stands, such as this one here, with an understory height of less than 4 feet. I specifically selected flatwoods that did not have a mid-story, so there is no overlap between how birds are using the structure and if the diversity of plants was influencing them at all. So these flatwoods here are adjacent to a natural edge. And once again, the natural edges consisted of canopied waterways, which were typically, and the plants found in these canopied waterways were typically greater than 6 feet in height. And they were also had a higher density of shrubs and trees than the adjacent flatwood. So within these canopied sloughs, plant assemblies varied greatly, and the natural edges I selected reflected a sharp habitat change from dense shrubs and trees to an open mesic flatwood less than 4 feet in height. So next, for my field sampling, at each site, I created 2 100-meter transects. So this here is the first transect, which would be representing near the edge, and then into the interior forest, which was the open understory, an interior transect. And plants surveyed along the edge, I ended up with a total of 16 woody plant species in 8 families. And using point count surveys, I also did bird surveys along these transects during fall and winter, and I ended up with 523 individuals, 34 species from 14 families. Okay, so now that I have my data, let's take a look at how this worked out with vegetation structure. So my question, how does avian diversity vary between edges and interiors of mesic flatwoods during fall and winter? I had a hypothesis that avian diversity found on the edge and forest interiors were structurally dependent, but influenced by the seasons. And how I calculated this was I used the Shannon Diversity Index, which takes into the account of species present as well as their abundances. All right, so let's see what we have. In summary, with my preliminary results, data for fall and winter indicate that bird diversity is related to vegetation structure, but there are seasonal differences between transect types. So during the fall, which is in green, the edge had slightly more diversity of birds than the interior. So this is the edge here, and this is the interior. But when I looked at the seasons, in the winter, there was a higher diversity of birds found along the edge than in the fall. But in the interior, they showed not that much difference in bird diversity. Okay, so what's next? My next steps are to add my spring migration because my analysis was done with only fall and winter. And I'm going to revisit my first question addressing avian diversity and vegetation structure. And my question 2, which I didn't mention earlier, is how does avian diversity relate to plant diversity during fall, winter, and spring? So I think, we do have time. So as I mentioned earlier, I was hoping that I had some time to kind of walk you through a few interesting places in North Florida's habitats. So basically, because my study primarily focused on woody plant species and birds, I would like to take a few minutes to highlight some beautiful herbaceous flowering species that can be found in the various natural communities in the Florida Panhandle, which is a biodiversity hotspot. But let me explain what's a biodiversity hotspot first. So a global biodiversity hotspot, there are currently 36 globally recognized biodiversity hotspots. And to be recognized as a global biodiversity hotspot, a region must contain at least 1,500 species of vascular plants found nowhere else on Earth, have at least 70% of its primary native vegetation. The coastal plain, which is highlighted in green here, all of this is the coastal plain, has 1,816 endemic plants and has suffered an 85.5% loss of natural habitat. So Florida is entirely in a coastal plain. So I'm going to start off with flowers found in Mesa flatwoods, which is the habitat my research was conducted in. And so here, on the left, we have beautiful rain lilies, and on the right, wild pennyroyal. And here we have the tar flower. Tar flower is really interesting. It was named the tar flower because of its sticky white flowers. You wouldn't think that these beautiful white flowers are sticky, but they are. You can find yellow butterworts in Mesa flatwoods. Yellow butterworts are carnivorous plants, and you can also find orange milkwort. Moving on to plants found in wet flatwoods. All 3 of these beauties are orchids, and this one here, the orange fringed orchid, is state threatened. And then we have a milkweed species, another yellow fringed orchid, which is state endangered, and a spurge, which is also federally threatened. So as you can see just from this here, Mesa Flatwoods is definitely one of those natural communities that's a special habitat in the area. Moving on to one of my newest explored favorite habitats is a seepage stream. So this habitat is known as a seepage stream, and these creeks and streams originate from shallow groundwaters. They have beautiful clear water with sandy bottoms and are often headwaters to Blackwater streams, and we'll get to Blackwater streams soon. In this habitat, you can find white top pitcher plants seen here on the left, which is state threatened, and beautiful mountain azaleas. And also more red pitcher plants, which are state threatened, and southern butterwort, which is state endangered. So you can just imagine seeing these beautiful plants, you know, in that beautiful clear water. It's really lovely. And so, as mentioned earlier, seepage streams, which is the stream habitat I just showed, are often headwaters to these black rivers and streams. These are one of the coolest environments also here, simply because these slow-moving channels of water move through forested swamps and wetlands. And basically what happens is that as the vegetation decays, tannins leach into the water, making transparent, acidic water resembling black tea. And this red that you see here, this is not Photoshop. This is exactly what it looks like. And it's pretty amazing. So these unique conditions lead to flora and fauna that differ from both white water and clear water. And some of the plants you could find along there would be blue flag iris, spider lily, and lizard tails. Moving on to my next area, my favorite area are wet prairies. So wet prairies are dramatically different environments between seasons of wet and dry and back again. And here, you'd be able to find lots of carnivorous plants. Wet prairies are full of them, like Venus flytraps, Tracy sundew. And the sundews use sticky granular leaves to lure and trap and then digestive insects. And this is something that I actually didn't know. You know, I always see this picture of a sundew with the insect in there, and I never actually saw before coming to North Florida how beautiful a flower sundews make. Once again, here there are some butterworts. Godfrey's butterwort is federally threatened. Chapman's butterwort is state threatened, and they are, as mentioned earlier, carnivorous plants as well, found in wet prairies. Yellow pitcher plants. This one here, I don't remember the species, but also a pitcher plant, and a parrot pitcher plant as well. Once again, all carnivorous. This little frog is not being eaten by this plant. It was just a cute moment. And so, yeah, that is what I have. I hope that you all enjoyed this. Just want to give a special thanks to my thesis committee and both of my labs, because I'm in 2 different labs. And for the wonderful photography to my significant other, Robert Gundy, for providing all those beautiful plant photos, and to the Cleveland Foundation, Holden Arboretum, and of course, my Black Botanist Suite Committee. And I think that is all.
Thank you for an amazing presentation, and to think you did that all within minutes of a total power failure. You are amazing. Everybody, I would love to give Ms. Fontaine a huge round of applause. Let's see those virtual clap hands, because that was really, yeah. I don't know how your cool was so cool. You kept your cool. So
I wasn't cool at home, believe me. I am full disclosure. I was freaking out. Okay. No.
That was a great presentation, and I know we have some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Allen, and we'll get these questions answered. And thank you. All right.
Awesome. So our first question, can you talk about how your background in visual communications have influenced your current research?
Yeah, so my background, it's actually because I worked in television production, it's very different to work and make presentations, scientific presentations for me, because it's kind of finding a balance between being unbelievably like creative and then now technical. So one of my struggles is finding that balance. And so once, like, for example, now I feel more comfortable making presentations, or actually putting presentations together, in the sense, and knowing, now that I know a lot of the more scientific, technical, you know, being trained scientifically now, I'm able to kind of put my creativity that I had to put on hold before back into my presentation slowly. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I think we have a question that's kind of similar, kind of like thinking about your origin story. How did you get interested in the study of birds and habitat associations?
Well, so funny thing is, I went, I'm from New York. So I went home, I think it was 2 winters ago, and I was kind of like just looking through some old boxes and stuff, and I found a book, and it was Gardening for Birds. And so, you know, I don't know when, this is like an elementary school book that I had. And, you know, that's something that I've always had an interest in. And I've always wanted to create a garden so birds can come. That was like my main goal. And so it wasn't an interest that I just knew that you needed the plants, you needed the right habitat to have these birds come. Maybe at the time I didn't know like what bird species were more associated. I just knew the basics. Plants, birds will come.
So I think that we've got the perfect set here. Are there ways that people in the migratory habitat can support birds while they overwinter and migrate?
Yeah, you can plant winter-friendly gardens. So it really depends on where you are geographically. I would say there are plenty of resources that, even your native plant garden to wherever you're living, nursery, you can go there and ask them for tips as far as like how to plant, a winter garden or, I think that would be the best thing. And there are lots of books also that can point you in the right direction as far as planting a garden that would support birds that are migrating. It also depends on, like, let's say you can focus on fruiting plant species and, plant a garden that really is a fruiting garden. So like one of the studies I described, and especially in this area here, a lot of the plants are fruiting during fall and winter, and they sustain that, birds that are overwintering here, the frugivores that are sustained here. So I would say take a look at a few books that focus on wintering birds and migratory birds and gardening.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. What are some of the biggest drivers of habitat use by birds? Are they queuing into nesting habitat, cover, food maybe? And does this vary by species?
Yeah, so one thing that with my spring data that I started to look at is, because what I found is a lot of breeding migrants. So in this area, we have some species that, they're migrating, but they stop here to breed. They're not going to keep going north. And what I found in some of the research that I read is that some of these birds are taking social, I guess you would maybe call them social cues from resident birds as far as quality habitat. So like say, for example, a resident bird is in an area and that's its territory, and there are a few of them that are in that territory. It seems that breeding migrants may be taking cues that, this might be a good habitat because there are a lot of birds here, a lot of resident birds here with territory. So there might be social cues like that are happening, but also it's kind of like testing the waters to see, like, is this a good place to go? And some birds also look for the structure first, and they know, like, for example, pine warblers like pine and tall canopies. So they're going to always go to, well, not always, but most of the time go to a habitat that has that kind of a vegetation structure versus an open area and there's no nesting structure. And then it's possible that once, the structure is analyzed, they chew into the plant diversity and are more species specific. Mm-hmm. So I'm not 100% sure, but I just think that from all of the research that I've reviewed and my own research, that it's complex. It's not just like a simple, okay, I like this structure and that's it. It's a combination of things.
Mm-hmm. Someone wants to know, what is the relationship between plants and birds regarding mutual or reciprocal coloration?
Plants and birds. Repeat that again.
What is the relationship between plants and birds regarding mutual or reciprocal coloration?
I'm not sure what that question means when you're saying mutual coloration. So,
audience member, would you like to clarify in the chat?
If the question is something like birds obtaining certain pigments and it affecting their color, yes, that does happen.
Bob Jones, if you'd like to expand your question in the chat. While you do that, I'm going to go to another question and we'll come right back to yours. What has surprised you about the relationships between tree species and birds?
What has surprised me about the relationship? Mm, I think what surprised me so far is just based on my field observations that some habitat specialists, like for example, certain woodpeckers, they're also foraging on lower shrubs. So I thought that that was interesting. And I'm trying to think of what else off the top of my head. Yeah, I think that was the main thing that I've noticed. And also seasonally, I've noticed that certain birds, their behavior in the fall is different in the winter, and also in the spring, I've noticed that. And, you know, just speaking about resident birds, that I primarily saw, you know, utilizing the interior forests in the wintertime. During spring, they're all over the edges. So that was something that was surprising to me.
Mm-hmm. Georgia says she's seen it in New York City as well, foraging on short holly. So Bob Jones came back and said, bird pigments reflecting the colors of plants or flowers.
Oh, that I'm not sure about. Reflecting? Okay, that one I am not sure about that.
Yeah, maybe like they share some of the same colors as the plants and the flowers that they're around.
It's possible, but I haven't really looked into that too much. Yeah, I know that certain fruit species that birds will feed on does affect coloration in birds as far as carotenoids and, you know, phenotypic expression, but I'm not sure as far as reflecting. That's a very interesting question, and I think after this talk, I'm going to look it up.
All right, so for our audience, we just have a few more questions here. So if you have a burning question, get it in the chat. And then Natasha, you're having some swooners in the chat saying amazing talk, you know, and sending their thank yous. So your next question is, do birds and carnivorous plants ever compete for insect food resources?
I'm not sure, but I'm going to take a guess and say no. I'm not 100% sure. That's a very interesting question, but I'm going to lean towards no. But it's possible. Yeah, I don't think it's, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's not impossible, but I don't think there's any competition between that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natasha. I'm seeing no more questions in the chat.
So I guess that's my cue to come back and ask everybody to give a big thank you to Ms. Fontaine again. Wonderful talk, beautiful eye candy, great research. Thank you so much. And thank you. And this is the point where we would usually tell you about the next talk. So instead, we have to tell you that this is the end of the Black Botanists Week lecture series. I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of the members of the Black Botanist Week Steering Committee. This has been an amazing series. And honestly, I don't know how I can thank you enough for the insights and the joy that you have brought to us here at Holden and to the audience. This series has made a substantial impact on Holden staff. And with over 4,157 views on YouTube already and counting, you can still watch all of the talks and over again. We're really proud to have played a very small role in amplifying your powerful and important message. I hope everybody keeps watching to see what Black Botanist Week Steering Committee is doing, because it's going to keep going and we're going to keep supporting. So thank you to all of the speakers. And I just, I have to give Maya a special shout out. You have been an amazing co-host and co-organizer. You have been a rock and you have been a delight to work with, and I really appreciate you. So thank you very much. And if everybody could give a round of applause for the whole committee. We'll be sad to see it end, but we are going to continue to promote our educational resources. So if you're a teacher in the audience, keep on the lookout. We're going to be doing a little bit of a revising. Ms. Allen has just put the link in the chat. We're going to do a little revising to make sure those materials are as perfect as they could be. And we're going to be having some opportunities to get trainings on those. So yeah, thank you everybody and have a good night.
Thank you.
I'm going to watch everybody leave the one last time. There's my mom left.